Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Freedom Convoy has continued its journey to Ottawa, with a stop earlier today in Manitoba. Political reporter Brian Lilly discusses if any federal party leaders will be willing to meet with the Freedom Convoy truckers. And we have the details of a fun and friendly bouldering competition that's coming to Lethbridge, raising money for a local food bank.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Freedom Convoy, which recently passed through Alberta and Saskatchewan, has now made its way into Manitoba. Organizers are hoping to have around 50,000 truckers join in by the time the group reaches Ottawa this weekend. Now, many of the truckers we've spoken to say this convoy is not just about the COVID-19 vaccine mandates for cross-border truckers, but it's really about fighting for our rights. Lorraine Stewart is covering the Freedom Convoy, which is now in Winnipeg. Lorraine, what's the latest?
Hal, the Freedom Convoy has made its way into Winnipeg, and they've been welcomed with open arms by hundreds of people who have gathered here to cheer them on with their signs. It's extremely cold today with temperatures reaching -25, but men, women, and even children brave the cold to cheer on who now they call their heroes. They are calling on the government to end all mandates, and not just the mandatory vaccine mandate imposed on truck drivers going to and from the United States. Organizers say they won't leave Ottawa until changes are made. Some truckers here we spoke to say they're fully vaccinated but don't support the mandates. They're excited to be joining this movement.
Like, it's not a vaccine protest. It's a mandate protest. It's a general political statement.
How is it going to make you feel driving and seeing all these people on the side of the road waving flags with their signs? What do you think that's going to...
Overwhelmed, definitely, yeah. Yeah, I would have never thought that we would see this much support, and I'm very excited to see the outcome.
A GoFundMe page set up to cover the truckers' expenses has already raised over $4.5 million in just a few days. What will be the end result of this Freedom Convoy? We won't know for a while, but truckers warn the longer they stay in Ottawa, the more bare the shelves are going to get in the store. Hal, that's the latest here from Winnipeg and the Freedom Convoy.
Great, thanks so much, Lorraine. Now the question is, will any of the federal party leaders meet with the truckers once they arrive in Ottawa? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has apparently already said no. I asked political reporter Brian Lilly his thoughts if perhaps Conservative leader Erin O'Toole would make an appearance and chat with those who are part of the Freedom Convoy.
I know a lot of people want Erin O'Toole to just say, well, to heck with it, and I'm going out there. He's got to be careful because he's got to look and see who shows up, what message are they bringing. If there's a bunch of people there with signs saying lynch the prime minister, he can't be out there seen with those people. If they're saying we need to arrest and jail Trudeau now, or hanging's too good for him. I've seen those messages from some people. They may be the fringe, but if they're out there in front as a political leader, you can't show up. And so I understand why O'Toole is doing that based on past history and how radicals often try and overtake political movements.
Brian Lilly will also talk about how many grocery store chains are experiencing empty shelves and supply chain issues. That Q&A is coming up later in our broadcast. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas says she supports the truckers and the Freedom Convoy headed to Ottawa. MP Thomas says the convoy is really about fighting for all of our freedoms. MP Rachel Thomas joins us now. So Rachel, is it safe to say that you're in full support of the truckers who are part of this rally?
This is definitely an initiative that I support. This is men and women who work incredibly hard to care for our country, to make sure that grocery store shelves are stocked and that we're well fed, among other things. And they're taking a stand for Canada. They're taking a stand for freedom. They're taking a stand for a return to normal life, and I support that.
So what kind of a message is this Freedom Convoy really sending to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
A great question. I think they're sending a really important message. There's been people across the country who have participated in different freedom rallies, and the mainstream media has been able to ignore them quite successfully, which is unfortunate. But when you have a convoy composed of trucks that stretch miles in length, you get attention. And then we're watching as Canadians are coming out along the highways and byways and cheering them on. And so this is an initiative that is resonating with Canadians. And I should mention it's the vaccinated and the unvaccinated alike who are coming out and supporting these individuals. It's also the vaccinated and the unvaccinated alike that are participating in this convoy as drivers. And so this is not a movement that is pitting one group against another. Quite the opposite. This is a movement that is unifying our country, and I applaud that.
Thanks so much, Rachel. That was Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas. A new report by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says more than 500,000 government employees received a raise during the COVID-19 pandemic, while governments imposed lockdowns that led to pay cuts and job losses in the private sector. Franco Terrazzano is the federal director with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and he joins us now from Ottawa. So, Franco, the report also says no federal or provincial government employees took reduced pay during the pandemic?
I hate that we have to say it, but we are not all in this together. I think we all know someone in the private sector who may have lost their job, took a cut, maybe even a small business that had to close their doors. But that wasn't the reality for government. We found that more than 528,000 government employees received at least one raise during the pandemic, during lockdowns, but not a single federal or provincial government reduced pay for its bureaucrats. So what we've really seen here is a tale of two pandemics, one full of pain for the private sector and the other full of financial gain for politicians and bureaucrats.
Now, the CTF report also discussed the difference in the number of government versus private sector jobs during the pandemic. What do those numbers look like?
This is another distinction. So not only are taxpayers paying for bigger salaries, taxpayers are also going to have to pay for more bureaucrats. During the pandemic, we have seen more than 300,000 new government jobs added, all while since the beginning of the pandemic, we now see less or we now see 80,000 fewer jobs in the private sector.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. The Alberta government announced that it is launching a number of initiatives to help reduce pressure on our province's emergency dispatch.
All types of calls have increased, and staff are, quite frankly, exhausted, and some Albertans are frustrated. We've heard from EMS staff, municipalities, contract providers, practitioners, and the public calling for help to ease the pressures on the system, and we are acting on what we heard. We're taking action over the short, medium, and long term to reduce response times and the burdens on staff.
Alberta Health Services EMS is taking immediate action with a 10-point plan to address the unprecedented pressure on the EMS system. The plan is made up of 10 new initiatives designed to help reduce demands on existing resources, to increase availability of ambulances for Albertan patients who truly need them, and to plan for the future.
A helicopter crash east of Camrose over the weekend sent 3 Government of Alberta employees to hospital. The workers were conducting aerial surveys for Alberta Environment and Parks when the crash occurred. All 3 are members of the Alberta Union of Provincial Employees. Now, the union says, regardless of what caused the crash, they expect the Government of Alberta to renew its focus on safety in the workplace.
In every work site, we hope that our employer is actually taking very seriously our health and welfare, because really, actually, at the end of the day, it is their obligation under law to protect us from harm. And we would hope that when an incident of this nature takes place, that they start to review what led up to it, if there's anything that can be changed so that this never happens again.
The cause of the crash is not yet known, and the workers are all recovering in an Edmonton hospital. Water competition was top of mind at Sackpaw and Lethbridge. Now, regions in the Canadian prairies of southern Alberta are learning how to manage declining water resources, lower snowfall volumes, and less predictable precipitation events. Dr. Dina McMartin is an environmental and agricultural engineer and vice president of research at the University of Lethbridge. She says there are challenges and constraints when it comes to maintaining water management here in southern Alberta, but there are also some interesting ways to conserve water.
I think one of the interesting things we've started to see in California irrigation systems is the use of solar panel canal covers And I think that would be a really interesting way of conserving resources by reducing evaporation rates coming out of the large canal systems while also producing some green energy for helping offset some of the pumping costs and the carbon footprint of irrigation pumping.
At the end of last year, the International Joint Commission appointed a board to cover a 4-year study to look at the St. Mary and Milk River systems. This includes implementing Blackfoot consultation and doing technical work around the ecological needs of our region. Supply chain issues are not only impacting food at the grocery stores, but it also seems to be affecting food banks. Officials at the Interfaith Food Bank in Lethbridge say so far they're doing okay with keeping their shelves stocked throughout the Christmas holidays, but now they're running low. Executive Director at Interfaith Food Bank, Daniel McIntyre, says they're low on specific products.
Typically, we try to go through about 70,000 pounds of food every month to serve families here in Lethbridge. With our food share programs, obviously that's a lot higher when we're dealing in bulk product. The supply chain, we are seeing the impacts, but it's not as if we are completely out. It's just in particular products. And so where we're able to replace or substitute, we're trying to make a go of that. But we do encourage people to donate as much as they can at this time of year.
McIntyre says they're running short of perishable items, including meat, dairy, and fresh produce. Bouldering fans in Lethbridge are set for a real treat. The 2022 Boulder Fest will be taking place for bouldering fans of all kinds. The friendly climbing competition is asking for non-perishable food items that will be distributed to the Lethbridge Food Bank. As Micah Quinn explains, the event will take place on January the 29th.
People are going to come in 5 groups, and they're going to climb the routes that we've set for them.
Organizers of Boulder Fest, Tanner Lesh and Elena Sulik, are making the jump to coulee climbing in Lethbridge. Now you might be wondering just exactly what bouldering is.
Bouldering is like shorter routes, so you don't climb as high. Obviously, there are no ropes. You climb in the gym, you climb a certain color at coulee, and so you might climb like all the red colored holds. And your goal is just to get to the top and have 2 hands on the top.
Lesh says Boulder Fest is a great place for beginners and non-beginners to come out and do some climbing and meet new people.
So there will be a recreational category, an under 13 category, and then as well there will be a competitive category where a lot of the stronger climbers in the community get to compete kind of in their own higher level area. And of course, most of the prizes are actually just going to be draw prizes, so you sign up. We have lots of sponsors that have decided to donate some prizes for the participants to have.
This year, Boulder Fest is collecting non-perishable food items for the Lethbridge Food Bank. These donations will go to things like the food hampers or the Mindful Munchies program that supports local school kids and gives them lunches during the week. The executive director of the food bank, Mac Nickel, says there are certain items that are needed.
Individual items like applesauces, juice boxes, things that you could see in lunch are always really good, especially to go towards our Mindful Munchies program. But then for our hampers, we look for a lot of things like canned meats, canned vegetables, things that have a long shelf life and are easy to cook with.
Due to COVID restrictions, there will be multiple sessions that will have to be run throughout the day. To register for Boulder Fest, you can visit couleeclimbing.com. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Family literacy is coming up, and officials with ABC Life Literacy of Canada say it's really important to take a couple of minutes every day to do something that involves learning. Program Director Elizabeth Robinson has some tips to improve learning for both kids and adults.
This could mean going for a walk and sort of thinking about or maybe reading about some of the things you encounter, the trees or the birds while you're outside. It can even mean when you're making a shopping list, taking a moment to talk a little bit about budgeting, about new words, about ingredients from countries that you've never been to or maybe want to visit. There's always an opportunity to sort of take things apart, learn a little bit more in the activities that we're involved in every day.
For Literacy Day this year, ABC has a campaign called Learning in the Great Outdoors. Robinson says being outside is a great place to exercise your mind, especially if you're feeling trapped inside. Robert Leeming of Calgary, who admitted to murdering his girlfriend in 2019, has also been found guilty of killing her 22-month-old daughter, Alia Sanderson. Their bodies were found in a shallow grave west of Calgary 3 years ago.
Our hearts go out to the Lovett family, the Sanderson family, and the Blankert family for everything they've been through in what's almost 3 years now. And it's unimaginable what they've gone through rather with the loss of Jasmine and Aaliyah. So we just want everyone to know that we're thinking of them, and that we hope that today is a day where they can feel like justice has been served. In a case like this, as you've pointed out, it's impossible for it to leave your mind the magnitude of what you're dealing with. And it's one thing to deal with, of course, the death of any human being, but anytime you're dealing with the murder, and not just the murder, but the way their bodies were found and everything that happened after that, it's a heavyweight, there's no question.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says his government will not impose further COVID-19 restrictions to reduce the spread of Omicron. Moe says people need to learn to live with the virus.
Omicron is spreading across Canada and spreading around the world regardless of the public health measures that are in place, which is why we have chosen to avoid increasing those public health measures and increasing the policies surrounding lockdowns here in Saskatchewan. We are not going to impose additional restrictions that cause significant harm for no significant benefit. I've also been challenged by some to provide evidence that lockdowns don't work. The evidence is right here in Saskatchewan as we manage through this Omicron wave with very little in the way of restrictions on people's lives. And we have lower rates of hospitalizations, lower rates of ICU admissions, and lower rates, thankfully, of fatalities through the month of January than many other provinces with much more severe restrictions.
Many skiers love this time of year because traditionally there's a lot of fresh powder on the hills and mountains. Some resorts, however, are using more snowmaking machines as they deal with warmer temperatures shortening ski seasons. Apparently the process is becoming quite efficient.
Aspen has lost a month of winter since 1980 and warmed about 3 degrees Fahrenheit. Snowmaking is going to increase because it's the only way to survive.
Snowmaking is really important to our early season because there's a ton of people that want to ski, and Colorado usually starts getting really good natural snow like it's doing now sometime in December. And so we rely on snowmaking in that early part of November just to kind of get things open, get a solid base, get people out and excited, and then bridge our way into the natural snowfall.
Any of these Western states are pretty pressed for water right now. Been going through a severe drought for the last couple of decades, really, in the Western U.S. And so every drop of water matters.
That's pretty cool. Not a lot of snow here in our region. We had slightly warmer temperatures today in southwestern Alberta, but hold on, there is a chance of some of the white stuff developing. A full look at the weather picture is coming up. It was nice that we got above zero again today. Tonight, more of the clouds will be rolling in, and we should see a low near -4. Wednesday, there's a 30% chance of flurries developing with a high near +2. Thursday, mainly sunny with a high of 7. Friday, even warmer with the mercury climbing to 8 degrees. Sunny with a high of 7 on Saturday. Just a few clouds and a high near 8 degrees on Sunday. Monday, a cold front moves in, bringing more clouds, a chance of flurries, and a high of only -3. Now, the average high for this time of year is -2 degrees and an average low of -14. The record high was 16 degrees set back in 2006, and the record low was -39 in 1943. The sun rose at 8:13 and set at 5:14. Looking at Wednesday's national forecast now, expect a mainly cloudy day with a high of 7 for both Victoria and Vancouver. A good chance of flurries and a high of 2 degrees in Edmonton. Flurries and +1 for Calgary. Regina's extreme cold warning has ended. Wednesday, expect light snow and a high of -2. A good chance of flurries and -1 in Saskatoon. Periods of light snow and -1 as well for Winnipeg. Toronto should be mainly sunny with a high of -12. Sunshine and -19 in Ottawa. Just a few clouds and -18 degrees is on tap for Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, partly cloudy and -8 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Cloudy and -2 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Clouds and -8 in Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect rain or freezing rain with a high of 4 degrees on Wednesday. Gofundme has frozen more than $4 million raised in the Freedom Convoy as truckers are rolling towards Ottawa. So far, more than 55,000 donors have contributed to the cause. Gofundme says it froze the money until the organizer verifies how the funds will be properly distributed. Now, the organizer, Tamara Lynch, has actually mentioned on social media that the money will go towards fuel, food, and lodgings for the truckers taking part in the convoy. The big riggers are headed to our nation's capital to join a protest where drivers from across the country are planning to converge. The International Monetary Fund has slashed its forecast for global economic growth this year from 4.9 to 4.4%. The 190-country lending agency says the downgrade is due to the spread of the Omicron variant, higher energy prices, and an uptick in inflation. The global organization downgraded Canada's 2022 growth from 4.1 to 3.3%. The outlook for the United States, however, was slashed even more from 5.2 to 4% because Joe Biden's economic stimulus bill has stalled in Congress. Volatility has been gripping the financial markets as investors gauge several threats, including both inflation and the pandemic.
New information will come out tomorrow, but the information that's on the table has been around for a minute.
And that information is?
That information is 4 to 5 interest rate raises in 2022, taking the taper balance sheet from 9 trillion to 4 trillion. So you're kind of taking your foot off the pedal, off the metal. You're not pouring gasoline on the fire, and you're raising interest rates into a market that hopefully will be strong enough to absorb it, perhaps maybe not right now.
Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 19 points on the day to finish at 20,590. The Dow was down 66 points to 34,297. The S&P 500 was down 53 points to 4356, and the Nasdaq was down 315 on the day to 13,539. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.80 to 85.10 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to 4.05 US. Gold was down 9 cents to 18.4792 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at 23.81 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $11.97 per bushel, barley's at $9.47, canola's at $22.43, and corn is at $10.67 per bushel. Live cattle were up 78 cents to $137.10, feeder cattle were up 8 cents to $158.55, and lean hogs were up $1.13 to $67.45. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 79.19 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the Gofundme campaign for the Freedom Convoy has now raised close to $4.6 million with over 55,000 donations. Truckers from across Canada say they're heading to Ottawa demanding our freedoms and that the COVID-19 mandates be rescinded. The Freedom Convoy is expected to arrive in our nation's capital this weekend. Now, will any of the federal party leaders be willing to meet once many of the truckers from the Freedom Convoy arrive in Ottawa this weekend? Political reporter Brian Lilly will give us his thoughts next.
Here's today's Bridge City News Community Calendar. Join the Helen Schuler Nature Center staff for a fun introduction to winter survival and test your skills through a series of team challenges. Taking place Saturday, February 5th from 1:30 to 3:30 p.m., this workshop will teach you valuable skills that you can use on your next winter adventure. Cost is $10 per person and is open for those 16 and up. The workshop takes place outside, so come prepared and dress for the weather. For details and to sign up, visit leisure.lethbridge.ca. On Saturday, February 26th, Streets Alive Mission is hosting their coldest night of the year fundraiser. This family-friendly walk is to raise money to help those who are experiencing hurt, hunger, and homelessness. To register, donate, and to find out more about this event and Streets Alive Mission, visit cnoy.org/Lethbridge. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
The Freedom Convoy of truckers is moving across the country and it's making its way to Ottawa. Now, the truckers and their supporters say this convoy is not just about the vaccine mandates, but about fighting for Canadians' freedoms. To discuss this in more detail is political reporter Brian Lilly. Now, Brian, we've had a few of these truckers on Bridge City News who are trying to send a clear message to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Trudeau was asked about the convoy. What was his response?
His response was to take what's a very serious issue in many ways, including how this vaccine mandate will results in supply chain shortages, everything from parts for manufacturers to the food upon your shelves, and turn it into these guys aren't vaccinated, and it's just angry truckers and angry conservatives. So he's taking a serious public policy issue and doing what he often does, turning it into a very partisan political issue for his own benefit. This is an issue that has been raised by the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Retail Council of Canada, the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. I've talked to the head of the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association, who said that it's going to impact his membership in terms of being able to get parts back and forth across the country, because this was an issue before the vaccine mandate kicked in. Canada has been short about 23,000 truck drivers. And so to add on to that, we're taking about 18,000 of them out of circulation because they're not allowed to cross the border anymore. And you take a bad situation with a shortage of truckers and therefore a shortage of ability to move goods back and forth, and you just make it worse. And Trudeau is determined to use this as a political tool to say it's just about vaccinations, it's about angry conservatives, beat up on Erin O'Toole, and show that to the many Canadians who are angry at anyone who isn't vaccinated, that he's on their side and all these other people are bad and they're prolonging the pandemic. That's his whole message about this. He doesn't see this as a serious issue.
What's interesting too, Brian, the truckers we've spoken to on Bridge City News say they are double vaxxed. The majority of the truckers heading to Ottawa are double vaxxed. It's more about fighting for our freedoms and lifting all of the mandates, getting back to normal. That's really what they're fighting for. So let me ask you something. Will any of the federal party leaders be meeting with the truckers once they hit Ottawa? How about Tory leader Erin O'Toole?
He's had a lot of his caucus members expressing support, but he has been hesitant to say yes. And if you think back to the Yellow Vest protest that were going on a couple of years ago, you can understand why. Andrew Scheer, who's just today was expressing vocal support for the truckers and saying, look, it's leading to product shortages. When he was Conservative leader, he went out and he met with the Yellow Vesters, who had a lot of different issues going on. There was a big convoy. It met in Ottawa, people from across the country. I remember covering it. But Andrew Scheer spoke on the same day as a controversial figure. Now, he was on the steps of Parliament Hill. This figure was down the street several blocks away. It didn't matter. The media just piled on and said, you were speaking at the same rally as so-and-so. And it hounded him and it damaged him politically. So I know a lot of people want Erin O'Toole to just say, well, to heck with it, and I'm going out there. He's got to be careful because he's got to look and see who shows up. What message are they bringing? If there's a bunch of people there with signs saying lynch the prime minister, he can't be out there seen with those people. If they're saying we need to arrest and jail Trudeau now, or hanging's too good for him, I've seen those messages from some people. They may be the fringe, but if they're out there in front as a political leader, you can't show up. And so I understand why O'Toole is doing that based on past history and how radicals often try and overtake political movements.
Are any MPs willing to show up and meet with the truckers at this rally once they hit Ottawa?
I'm sure several of them will, but again, I think a lot of them will be looking out the windows and saying, okay, what signs are out there? Who's the leader? Because as I said, you can get painted, as Andrew Scheer all too well knows, you can get painted because some fringe elements show up. So a number of them are expressing their support. They are raising this issue. They're pointing out that this is a legitimate issue, but whether they meet with them will depend on the message that the leadership brings and the message that's out front with the signs. And that's just safe politics, because you can turn off an awful lot of people by allowing fringe elements to take over.
Brian, a woman from Medicine Hat here in Alberta set up a GoFundMe page that has raised more than $4 million for the truckers and the Freedom Convoy. But earlier this week, the company behind GoFundMe said they would not release any funds until a plan was in place to spend the money as promised. Some actually look at this as being political interference.
Well, the company would say no, and I kind of understand where they're coming from. Tamara Lish is her name. I think I'm pronouncing it right. Leach or Lish from Medicine Hat. And she's involved in the Maverick Party. Her family has owned a trucking business in the past. She's involved in music. She's involved in a lot of things. So very much a community leader. She set up the page. it has been far more successful than she ever dreamed. And if they'd raised $20,000 to $50,000 and they said, well, and they had a loose plan of here's how we're spending the money, I think GoFundMe would have released it. But they've raised more than $4 million now, Hal. Earlier today, I was checking, it was 4.2. I'm sure it's gone up because that's $500,000 more than yesterday afternoon when I looked. And so the company has, they have to look after their reputation and be able to say to people who come to them and say, well, I want to donate to this cause, that it's being handled right. So all they've asked Tamara to do is show us the plan of how the money will be dispersed, what it will be spent on. She has assured her followers that it is going to be spent properly, that she's working with the company. So she doesn't seem bothered. But again, I go back to, she's got to be careful that she is not allowing the radical elements that will try and attach themselves to her and her very successful cause from damaging what has been a very successful fundraising effort and a very successful convoy. That's my advice to anyone in any new political movement. Watch who's attaching themselves to you, because your name and your reputation get damaged in the end, not the people who are on the fringe who no one will remember at the end of the day.
And she did mention as well that you'd be spending the money towards food, fuel, and lodgings for the truckers participating in the Freedom Convoy. And Brian, over 45,000 Canadians have now donated. And like you said, over $4 million. It's pretty incredible. Brian, I was shopping at my local grocery store here in southern Alberta, and I saw a number of empty shelves. I've had other friends send me pictures as well from different cities that they live in, including in Hamilton, Ontario, empty shelves at their local grocery store. But then other people have posted online, look, I've got full grocery store shelves here. Now, you've been speaking with people from various industries across the country. The debate is bizarre. What's the reality as you see it? Are we actually seeing a supply shortage here right now?
So yes, we are. How bad it is will depend on where you are. Now, I want to be clear. The supply chain shortage predated the vaccine mandates for truckers. It has been going on throughout the pandemic. You speak to anyone who deals with supply chain logistics, and they say it has been very stressful, tenuous at best on whether you get the goods that you ordered. And if you remember earlier in the pandemic, we did see a lot of products just simply not available, and it wasn't all due to hoarding. If you're a fan of a soft drink that isn't the most popular brand, you couldn't get it for a couple of months because they were only making Diet Pepsi and Real Pepsi and Coke and Diet Coke, and they weren't making their others. And so if you wanted something different, you couldn't get it. A lot of that had to do with supply chain issues. We saw before the mandate even took place, we saw the snowstorm down in Nova Scotia. It showed how fragile things are, because for a couple of days there were empty shelves in many Atlantic Canadian grocery stores. We saw with the big snow dump, 50 centimeters in a day in Ontario. Last week, that the same thing happened. So last week it was probably the snowstorm. This week, we're starting to see the impact of the 23,000 truckers that were short, plus the 18,000 that can't cross the border, plus the Americans that aren't allowed to come this way because they've instituted their own mandate as well. So it goes both ways across the border. So it's a combination of all things. Trudeau's policy is not helping. I went out to 3 grocery stores just yesterday. I went out to a Metro, a Farm Boy, and a Loblaws. The Loblaws at Maple Leaf Gardens in downtown Toronto, Hal. The entire onion section gone. The potato section just about wiped out. I went through cooking oils, frozen food in some areas, juices. These were the things that were missing. At the Metro, it was meat, it was produce, it was oils and sauces again. So this is an ongoing issue. And anyone that wants to tell you it's not is playing politics. You can't blame it all on the mandate, but that doesn't help. It's a perfect storm right now. And that's why Trudeau needs to rethink his policy, because his policy is hurting rather than helping.
Many people would also argue the flooding in British Columbia impacted our food supply chain, and as well the drought that we had here, the nasty drought here in southern Alberta. Brian, a controversial subject has been Quebec's so-called anti-vax tax. Has it been implemented yet? And what are the polls saying? What do Canadians really think about this issue? Are they getting behind it?
Well, it's interesting. They are, and I'll get to those poll results and the numbers in a moment. But Quebec announced it, and then everyone said, "Look, there's been a big spike. They got 7,000 appointments in one day," and then it petered off. I've been following the Quebec numbers, and some days it's 2,000 to 4,000 people are getting their first vaccination, and that's of all ages. So including children 5 to 11 who only recently became eligible for it. Well, next door in Ontario, they're regularly doing 9, 10, 11,000 and more per day without the threat of a vaccine, anti-vax tax, as we call it. So people think that these measures improve the situation, even when they don't. As I pointed out many times before, Quebec has had the most draconian measures throughout the pandemic, and they've had the worst results, whether it's by case count, by death count, however you want to look at it, they've had the worst results, but the most draconian measures. And yet the public is irritated. And so there've been a couple of polls showing majority support, between 52 and 60% support for an anti-vax tax. There was even one poll that showed, they said, well, how far would you go? And they kept increasing the penalties that people would face until they got to jailing the unvaccinated. And 27% of Canadians said, yeah, jail them. So that's how steep the divide is in the country. And I don't think politicians like Justin Trudeau or Francois Legault in Quebec are really helping the situation by further dividing and angering people and then using that for their own political gain, which is exactly what they're doing.
The Trudeau Liberals have advised Canadians in Ukraine to consider leaving as tensions flare with Russia over a potential invasion. Now, is Canada's position firmed up on the Ukraine-Russia dispute?
Well, it would appear to, though the Trudeau Liberals did have a bit of an own goal, or look silly, however you want to put it, over the weekend. They kept having cabinet ministers and caucus members hold up a sign saying, I stand with Ukraine, just on a piece of paper with hashtag I stand with Ukraine. Sorry, that will not leave Vladimir Putin shaking in his boots. That's just not going to happen. I'm not sure there's much Canada could do, but it's not a serious policy response. It's not a serious way to handle what is a very serious issue. Vladimir Putin is threatening Ukraine, and not just because NATO is considering protecting Ukraine or allowing it, but because he has an expansionist mindset. He wants to take what he thinks is his, and he doesn't think that Russia ever should have given up Ukraine, even though it was an independent country and it's an independent people for years and there's a lot of ties to Canada. So the Trudeau Liberals have told Canadians to get out. They have said that they will consider offering small arms. And so small arms can be anything from pistols to rifles and in that category, as opposed to heavy arms, which would be tanks, cannons, etc. They're looking at giving some supplies to the Ukrainians. They have offered, I believe it was $120 million loan to Ukraine. May as well consider it a gift. I'm not sure we'll ever get it back, but Ukraine is a country that we want to turn towards Western Europe. We want to turn towards the Western view, but there's a struggle within Ukraine, and they haven't figured out their own house yet. They haven't gotten their own house in order, and that's part of why Putin is trying to take advantage of it at the moment.
And south of the border, the Biden administration has promised Ukraine $200 million in weaponry as well, as the tensions continue to rise, like you said, with Russia. Now, speaking of guns, our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau continues to push ahead on his gun control plan, even as more and more evidence, Brian, as you say, shows it's really not working. What's the latest?
You know, last week, Hal, I got a news release from the Toronto Police Service indicating that someone had a number of firearms and they were arrested and he's facing a number of charges over this. And I looked and I said, well, that's impossible. Justin Trudeau's banned that one. And no, he banned that one and he banned that one. And of course, the handguns the guy had, they've been banned for decades. So how on earth did this happen? Didn't he get the memo? Unfortunately, you know, we're dealing with another wave of shootings and murders in this city. Toronto's not alone in this. It's happened across the country. It's been going on for several years. Since about 2015, 16, it really started to rise. And the Trudeau administration, their entire viewpoint is, well, take more guns away from the people who passed the gun safety course, who submitted to having the RCMP do a thorough background check, including having their spouse or their intimate partners sign off on them being allowed to have a gun. You know, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but if you wanted to go and buy a gun, Hal, your wife would have to be consulted at the least. She could say, I don't want to say anything. She could say, no, I don't think it's a good idea. Or she could say, Hal's a great guy. He'll be fine as a gun owner. But they have to reach out and ask, do you want to speak to anyone's spouse? You know, we have incredibly strict gun control in Canada already, but it's not on the people who are committing the crimes. A recent report out showed that the Canada Border Services Agency is not doing a good job of stopping guns coming across the border. And that's where we should be focused. Unfortunately, the Trudeau Liberals want to look at the easy target, and those are the people already following the law.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilly, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Over the past couple of years during the pandemic, we've not heard as much about global warming and climate change. However, we've been shocked by a lot of the floods and fires in British Columbia. Here in southern Alberta, we've had extreme heat and drought this past summer. These events are hard to experience and as well hard to forget. People look for answers during events such as these, and we question the source. Are they natural occurrences and cyclical weather patterns, or are they man-made? Joining me now to talk about some of the issues is the communications manager with the Calgary-based Friends of Science Society, Michelle Sterling. Michelle, thanks for joining us here on Bridge City News today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. First of all, can you give kind of a brief snapshot, a description as to what Friends of Science does?
Yes, Friends of Science is a small nonprofit. We're run by volunteers. We started in about 2000, around the time of Kyoto, and it's made up of retired and semi-retired professional geoscientists, Earth atmospheric scientists, solar scientists, and professional engineers. And at the time that the group was founded, they were concerned about Kyoto, which is kind of a forerunner to the Paris Agreement of today. And so they were concerned that the science seemed very skewed and the economics would be devastating to Canada. So the group thought, well, we'll just put together some briefs and send them off to people in power and, change their mind with facts. But here we are 20 years later, still fighting the same fight, trying to get some open civil debate on climate and energy topics.
Well, let's talk a bit about your background, first of all. How did you get involved with Friends of Science?
I've always been involved in communications, and I was writing op-eds for the Red Deer Advocate at one point, and prior to that, I'd worked at Alberta Environment. I was tracking the tar sands campaign and saw that a lot of that was moving toward a climate influence, if you like. And so one of my former broadcast colleagues, an executive from the former ITV, contacted me and said, hey, you should get hold of Friends of Science. They can give you some of the climate change info. And by the way, maybe you would be a good PR person for them. So that's how it rolled out, and the rest is history.
Now, before we get into some of the environmental questions, I want to chat with you a bit about coal. As you know, coal mining is a major impact here in the southern Alberta economy for jobs, but a lot of people are also quite concerned when it comes to selenium making its way into the Oldman River, impacting our water quality here. Now, the NDP began to phase out our coal, but your group has a lot of information about how Alberta coal is actually not a major polluter. Can you explain?
Yes, well, we were quite opposed to the NDP coal phase out, largely because since I had worked at Alberta Environment, I knew that our air quality in Alberta is excellent most of the time. And we have very substantial environmental impact assessments for all these projects before anything goes ahead. And so, I think environmentalists try to paint the scenario as if they're the only ones defending the environment when, we had about 1,200 people working for Alberta Environment when I was there, many of them scientists. So, first of all, Alberta coal is very high quality. It's low sulfur, it's surface mineable. So that means that reclamation is quite easy to do. And some of the places that have been restored have been turned into very nice recreational areas. And also it's really a hedge against what we're seeing in the world right now, to have coal, which is basically price stable, and we own 800 years of it here in Alberta. And to be abandoning that when we see natural gas prices are spiking worldwide, there's a supply problem. The UK people are facing thousands of pounds, dollars, of costs for their energy this year. Most people will be pushed into heat or eat poverty, and that's affecting us too. That energy crisis will hit us too. And what have we done? We've phased out our coal plants, which provide affordable, reliable power, and we have the energy supply here. And now we're buying coal power from Montana and Saskatchewan and putting another burden on taxpayers because that money leaves the province. And further to that, the irony is that many of the health unions were very adamant in the coal phase out campaign. But what does modern medicine entirely rely on? Electricity. And it needs affordable, reliable, high quality, meaning no dips and surges, because that will set all the equipment off. All that specialized equipment has to be calibrated. So, coal would be the ideal factor. And about 75% of the power in Alberta is used by industry as well. So it was an integral part of the Alberta advantage.
Michelle, last year we saw the town of Lytton, BC burn down to the ground. It was very tragic. And there have been a lot of forest fires in British Columbia and the atmospheric rivers, which brought a lot of rain floods. Certain voices are claiming this is due to climate change. What do you say about these events?
Well, the town of Lytton has sadly burnt down about 4 times before in history. So when people tell you that something is because of contemporary man-made climate change, first thing you should do is look at history and see if it's happened before. And the same with the floods. The biggest flood in the Sumas Valley, in the Fraser Valley area, was in 1894, and it has not been exceeded yet. So, the atmospheric rivers are associated with what's called the Pineapple Express, and it's a change in the jet stream where the subtropical jet stream picks up a lot of water from the ocean and carries it, literally like picking it up in a big aerial bucket and throwing it on land when it reaches landfall. And if you look historically, there's a Scientific American article on Sacramento where in 1861-62, they had 43 straight days of rain. And when the atmospheric river was coming in, the Aboriginal people who lived there saw what was coming and they headed for the hills. So obviously they were familiar with this phenomenon and it was nothing new. So, that doesn't mean that humans have no impact on climate change, but it definitely means that a carbon tax, building wind and solar farms will not do anything to stop these kinds of events. We instead need to be prepared. And if we're building on a floodplain, we need to properly build those dike systems. And we have to build for the likelihood that there will be this kind of condition.
Of all of the climate change or global warming predictions from the government, have any actually come true?
No. No, none of them have come true. And really what people need to understand is that the definition of climate change, according to the IPCC, is it's a change in the state of climate that can be identified by statistical means that occurs over a period of decades. So these are all singular events that we've been talking about. These are not decadal events where the same thing is happening year after year over decades. So that's not evidence of climate change. These are extreme weather events and they're integral to climate. We have a whole presentation on that by Dr. Kandekar on our website under our events. And we do have another report by Robert Lyman, who was a federal public servant for 27 years, and he was also a diplomat for 10 years. And he calls it When Climate Prophecy Fails, and showing that none of the prophecies support the claims of the climate emergency. And we have another report called A Confluence of Carbonbaggers, which shows that most of the big climate movement is related to people who want to establish cap and trade systems worldwide and make you pay for it.
So it's all about following the money, as my father used to say? Is that what it is?
Yes, that's a very, very big part of it. A very big part of it. And one of the challenges, of course, in predicting what will happen is that the climate community, the scientists, use what are called climate models. They're not like model toys where you maybe get a submarine and it's 1/32 of the size or 400th of the size of an actual submarine. These are computer models, they're simulations. And the IPCC itself said in one of their early reports, and let me just read this quote: "In climate research and modeling, we should recognize that we're dealing with a coupled, non-linear, chaotic system, and therefore long-term prediction of future climate states is not possible. So, if it were a linear system, it would be like dominoes. You could say, oh, there's a whole bunch of human-caused global warming from this plant, and boom, 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 over here, we're seeing the effect of climate change because of that. But it's not. It's a very complex system with many complex dynamic interactions of the sun, the ocean, etc. So I sent you a little diagram that Professor Henri Masson made, that he's a complex systems expert, and it gives you a sense of, wow, so many elements. Who could predict the outcome?
Michelle, we recently had a professor from the University of Lethbridge talking about seeing the ice shelf shrinking in Canada's Arctic, but there's also been information that the ice pack is growing in the Arctic. So which is it?
Well, the Arctic is always a kind of a funny place to explore in terms of the sea ice, because it's really like a big ice cube sitting on top of moving currents, warm and cool currents. And so we have a short video on our website, on our YouTube channel, with Dr. Ian Clark, who discusses the Holocene hypsothermal and how about 8,000 years ago, the Arctic was ice-free and all the polar bears were fine. So obviously some of these things are cyclical. And then we have another number of commentaries in our report rebutting the federal government's report on climate change, the 2019 one. Our report is called Climate Change Your Mind. And in that, we refer to a study that shows that in the Arctic in the 1930s, when CO2 was much lower than now, it was 4.6 degrees Celsius warmer up there than from 1981 to 2010. So obviously, these are cyclical events. They're affected by different factors. And one of those factors may be related to underwater geothermal activity. That would be like submarine volcanoes or subliminal volcanoes. And we have some posts by Professor Wis Yim, who shows that, like right now there's the big Cumbra Vieja eruption in La Palma in the Canary Islands. Well, that kind of volcanic activity way down there may lead to heat going into the Gulf Stream, which then goes up into the Arctic. And that would affect the sea ice variability. So, people could have a look at that. So again, there's so many factors involved, like, a carbon tax isn't going to save the polar bears. In fact, they're doing quite well.
Michelle, the energy sector has been hurting for quite some time in our country, and especially here in Alberta. Would you consider the efforts to keep Alberta petrochemicals out of the market part of efforts to protect our environment, or do you see maybe a different motivation?
Oh, I see it as a green trade war. There's no doubt in my mind. I think if you look at Matthew Nisbet's work, he's a professor of communications. He's followed a number of the major philanthropies. Many of them are based in the States, but some are in Switzerland and Europe. And they've been pumping at least $600 million a year into environmental groups. And these environmental groups, of course, have claimed, that the tar sands is a carbon bomb and stuff like that. And I think that it's been very useful for the renewables industry to use the portrayal of the Alberta oil sands, which look pretty dirty when you see that aerial view, that this is a representation of dirty energy, whereas wind and solar is presented as if it's clean, when in fact wind and solar is made from tons of coal, lots of natural gas, and barrels of oil. It couldn't exist without oil, gas, and coal, but it's been a useful marketing tool. So to my mind, we're in the top 10 exporters of oil in the world. Our competitors are just laughing all the way to the bank while we shoot ourselves in the foot.
Michelle, anthropomorphic climate change sounds kind of like a strange phrase, but can you really explain what it means? And what has your research shown if this is in fact a reality?
Yeah, anthropomorphic or anthropogenic climate change is real. We do affect climate. And I think some of the more grounded information would come from Roger PLK Sr., who is a climate researcher in the States. And he's written a lot about how humans affect climate through land use, like agriculture, urban heat island, building cities, water diversion, and deforestation. Now, these are not really properly accounted for, and also these are things that we need to do in order to live. I think you'll know about the urban heat island if you've ever driven in from the country to the city or vice versa. You can often see a 5 or 6 degrees Celsius change in temperature just in it because the cities retain heat. Now that's been a very controversial element in the claims of global warming because many of the temperature monitors are near these cities, and so the temperature is contaminated by the urban heat island, which is not reflective of what the temperature is elsewhere. So it is a real thing. We do contribute to climate change and to warming, but Mother Nature, in our view, is much more influential. In our view, it's the sun that is the main driver of climate change, certainly not carbon dioxide. And we can see that because recently carbon dioxide levels have risen considerably, but temperatures have not. So there's a grand divergence there. And also, if you check the weather balloon and University of Alabama Huntsville satellite data, you find that this is where the temperature is, while the models are predicting a very steep increase in temperature. But this is not happening. The reality is that temperatures are flatlining or even declining.
Michelle Sterling with Friends of Science, thanks for joining us today from Calgary.
My pleasure. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.